Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and I am humbled in the midst of the fourth largest city in the nation of such diversity to stand with such courageous persons that, bar rain or enormous heat, difficult travel, believe that the journey and the cause that they are engaged in as I join them is a powerful one for the sanctity and the freedom lovers of America. I thank Martin Luther King III for his presence, hailing and coming from Georgia, and Rashad Robinson, Wanda Mosley, Shellie Hayes-McMahon, to be here in their respective personal and representative ways. Let me try to do this to my colleagues that are standing in this heat, but I have such passion, such pain, such overwhelmed, because I know that there are people getting on buses, picking up children, working with their hands, that over the decades have depended on the United States Supreme Court. Their families, their women, their men. I grew up with such awe because I am a child of the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision. I look to the hills for the Supreme Court to give me hope. A child of the Civil Rights Movement, as the Justice Department became the arm of the foot soldiers and Dr. King when the states would not respond. In law school, I was a Justice Earl Warren legal scholar, a Republican Supreme Court justice. I didn't know party affiliation, either as a young person, a younger person, or a law student. I looked to the Supreme Court as we would look to the hills for justice. But as I have come to this point, I bring us now many decades later, reminded of President Barack Hussein Obama, who had a balanced nominee. Not everyone agreed, but a balanced nominee. That nominee is the Attorney General at this time, but a balanced nominee. Sometime in the early beginnings of 2016, I was in Congress. We were prepared to be able to be the armor bearers, to be able to push forward a reasoned person that would come to the court respecting all Americans. We were blocked and blocked and blocked and blocked and denied. And just in the waning minutes and seconds, someone else was put before us. And much evidence came against that person. And yet they ascended to the court. It was obvious their bias. Go 4 years later with 2020, in the midst of the election, just about the precipice of November, when Americans will be casting their vote. Another person, the powers to be, Mr. McConnell at that time, and he was in 2016, there was no problem to put in Amy Coney Barrett. And so Americans said, they stood speechless. But they stood by, Martin, just to not condemn and to make judgment. And then the court sat, and it began to render decisions. You wonder why we stand here today? Why I'm a supporter of court expansion and the fairness in the court system is because the court that I look to the hills for, the ones that I admired, has now been caught up in a decisively conspicuous partisan divide. The court that I admired, the court that I said, if there's no other hope other than God, there's the United States Supreme Court. That is the hope of civil rights leaders. That is the hope of activists, war activists. That is the hope of women who simply want to be left alone with the choices of their body. It is their hope. That's all they wanted. They expected to have their cases presented. They expected to have the best counsel. They expected to have people make the argument. Those who are begging for relief in student loans done by elections count by the President of the United States, who said it is appropriate in this time that those who are in this economic condition have the burden of student loans that probably should not have had them in the first place. We are giving them relief. But yet, we're now at the foot of the Supreme Court of the United States, and we are shaking in our boots. And so I come here today to join with friends who live in urban communities and rural communities. As I stand here under the sun in Houston, I know that our city depends upon a fair and balanced United States Supreme Court. In criminal justice matters, in reproductive right matters, in education matters, as we face discrimination in our schools and our public schools by states that don't pay attention to diversity and the ability to teach our history, we rely upon the United States Supreme Court in the 14th Amendment, the 5th Amendment. And it is important that we take note that we can now discern who is what. Is that a shame? We should not have that distinction. It should be United States Supreme Court who upholds justice on precedent, yes, on the 14th Amendment, on the 5th Amendment, on the right to privacy in the 9th Amendment, a woman's right to choose, and yet the Dodd decision and any number of criminal justice decisions that don't help law enforcement and don't help people. And then, of course, the unexpected fear of decisions now coming on diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, decisions now coming on reproductive rights, student loans, etc. I end my remarks by simply saying, don't look in these faces and look awry to suggest that you're seeing people that are not patriots. Each and every one that you will hear today is a patriot. Because if you look in your Constitution, every single one is holding that book. They are supporting every one of that Bill of Rights that is blessed and bestowed upon our birthright. I stand here as a patriot, a lover of America, but a fighter for that which is wrong, to fight against it, and then, of course, to protect the throngs that are just on jobs today that cannot speak for themselves. And some decision may be made that takes away their rights. And they're just innocent citizens of a city, maybe Houston, citizens of a county, a hamlet, a state. I'm glad to join my colleagues today to be able to, on this day of International Anti-Gun Violence Day, to be able to support a fair Supreme Court that will recognize cases, gun violence, anti-gun violence, excessive guns, and others, and do their decision-making fairly. It is my pleasure now to introduce both an icon in his name, but you see, I have seen the work of Martin Luther King III. He needs no association, but it is obvious he has spent his life fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. I am grateful that he has sacrificed what would be a life of comfort to be with us today and to be with all of those who cannot speak for themselves. Martin Luther King III.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And to each and every colleague I'm joining, Rashad Robinson, Wanda Mosley, Shellie Hayes-McMahon, and the countless organizations that support what we're here for. My dad used to say that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I can't be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can't be what you ought to be until I'm what I ought to be, because our destinies are tied together. On the one hand, I'm saddened to come to this great state, Congresswoman, not because of the heat. We got heat in Georgia. But because legislators have come together and taken a piece of legislation against this largest county, not just this, actually it was done, I understand, in Austin as well. How do you make legislation that's supposed to be representative, you're representing the people, that is just designed for Austin as one county, Bear County, I believe that is, and Harris County, a different piece of legislation. Oh, Travis County, excuse me. I'm sorry. But the largest county in the state. There's something wrong with that. And there's nowhere to appeal to. Because the United States Supreme Court, those who are there, it's questionable as to what specifically they're going to do, although historically, whenever we went to the court, and as the Congresswoman talked about, it was for relief, and it was for moving forward, not backward. The Dobbs decision was the first time, I believe, that the court took an exclusive decision and moved backward. So the remedy has to be expansion. And that's what this just majority coalition represents, that we're talking about today. In August, we will observe the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington in Washington, D.C., where my father 60 years ago delivered his vision for our nation. And if he and my mother were here, I know they would be greatly disappointed. In fact, I think my dad is just spinning in his grave, and my mom, because we are truly a better nation than the behavior we're exhibiting. But we can never accomplish what we need to accomplish unless we come together through organizations, through voters, because I know that it only takes a few good women and men to bring about change. My dad and mom demonstrated that, and many others, through their leadership. But what I also know is that this is not a sprint. I wish we could just sprint across the line and change this tomorrow. Unfortunately, many of these battles are marathons. And so we are committed to taking actions and creating the consciousness first. Because when the consciousness is there, the changes will occur. See, we have the ability to do most anything, but we may not yet have identified the will. When ability and will come together, it yields results. And so I am grateful to have the opportunity to be here today with this leadership circle. This is just one of many things that are going to be done to arouse the consciousness of America for Americans. It really is about doing the right thing for all people. It doesn't mean that we're going to always agree, but we can have constructive conversations. You see, civility has been lost in the public space. We've got to bring civility back. And part of that will be the expansion, I believe, of the courts. Now I am pleased to introduce Rashad Robinson, the president of Color of Change, and a critical partner in the Just Majority campaign. As president of Color of Change, Rashad has taken on and his organization many issues around accountability, changing in the media, a variety, as I said, of issues. In the tech arena, and most importantly, when you look at the issue of policing and the issue of justice, that is part of what he and his organization represents. I'm honored to present Rashad Robinson.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Martin Luther King III, for that. Thank you to the other speakers. It's always great to be here in Houston with the great Congresswoman, and I just want to appreciate you for all of your work and leadership. I am always privileged to stand with organizations like Black Voters Matter and Planned Parenthood and all of the other organizations that fuel and power this work that we are doing here. The work to actually fight for a better tomorrow. Color of Change is a next generation racial justice organization. We were founded in the aftermath of a flood, which was caused by bad decision makers, Hurricane Katrina. And it became a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. Black folks were literally on their roofs begging for the government to do something and left to die. And issues like Katrina don't just illustrate sort of the harms in the moment. They show us things that we already knew. Geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of what we have done to this planet, and so many other issues. But at the heart of those issues, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. Government, corporations, media. The reason why we fight and get engaged in democracy is to make our voices heard in powerful ways, to take our voices to the people in power, and to sometimes make it so that our voices are in power. We have a theory of never mistaking our presence for power. Presence and visibility, retweets, shout outs from the stage are good. But when we mistake presence for power, we could sometimes think we've done something that we haven't done. We can think that a Black president means that we are post-racial. We can think that America's love and celebration of Black celebrity means that America loves Black people as much as America loves Black culture. And America can love, celebrate, and monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And that is why our ability to express our will for a better future through the vote is so critically important. That is why being able to be involved in democracy and fighting for a better tomorrow is so important. I remember growing up in a town on eastern Long Island. My family got there through the Great Migration from the farm fields of Virginia to the farm fields of Long Island. My grandfather would take me into the voting booth with him, and he would put me on his shoulders, and that was back when they had the lever machine, so he would let me pull the lever and sometimes ask me to read the names. He would ask me to read them out loud, and sometimes he would correct my reading because we lived in a town where sometimes the names weren't that phonetic. There was a large Polish population, and the phonics that I was sort of learning at the time didn't always translate to the names. It wasn't until after my grandfather died, my grandpa Charlie, that I found out that as a young man, he went into the fields at 6 as a sharecropper and never got a formal education, and he never learned how to read or write. That time in the voting booth with him was an opportunity for me as a young man, not with another adult, to help him through the process of expressing his will for a better future, expressing his will for his family and for his community. And I'm always struck by, in a country that sent him so many messages every single day about his value, that he still wanted to engage. And in so many ways, that is what this tour is about. Because we all want to express our will for a better future, regardless of whether we are privileged or vulnerable, in the majority or the minority, or in favor or out of favor with whoever may be in power at any given moment. But when we go to the polls to express our will, and there is an unelected, unaccountable, corporate-controlled body at the end of the line of all of the legislation that we fight to win that says no, no to helping out students, no to supporting women's health, no to ensuring equity, no to all of the things that the people stand for, then we have a problem with democracy. And it's not just about presence, it is about power. And power is the ability to change the rules. And right now, a few select people, corporations, and those that want to keep their privilege in place are ensuring that those, the majority of us who want to fight for a better tomorrow, can't actually make that so. And so what are we going to do about it? We're not just going to sit back and continue to play the same game over and over again and hope for different results. And that is why I am so proud to not just stand with the 40 organizations behind the Just Majority Tour. I am proud to invite as many people as possible, the millions of members that power the work of Color of Change, our allies across the country, anyone who believes that democracy is about making our voice heard and expressing our will for a better future needs to stand with us in this moment, because that is what this is all about. Very soon we're going to hear decisions from the court about student debt. We're going to hear we're going to hear decisions from the court about whether or not our colleges and universities should be diverse. Institutions that are nonprofits and benefit from tax exemptions, whether or not they should serve all of us. We have already heard decisions on our women's right to choose and so many other issues that are being decided not by the people, but are being decided by a set of people that overwhelmingly were put in place by people who were not even elected by the majority of this country. And that is the work ahead. That is the invitation to the fight. And that is why this work is so incredibly important. I am so proud to bring up Wanda Mosley now from Black Voters Matter. Black Voters Matter is one of the most important and powerful organizations in this country, working inside of states all around this country to help Black people and to help Black allies and to help anyone who believes in Black progress and struggle. Because when Black people win, this country moves in the right direction. And Black Voters Matter understands that the fight for a better tomorrow means that the more of us that can participate, the better off this country is. So come take us away, Wanda, and thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Wanda Mosley. I'm the National Field Director at Black Voters Matter. And while I'm excited to be in the great city of Houston and my birth state of Texas, the occasion that brings me here is one of great frustration, anger, and concern for this country and for this thing called democracy. Black Voters Matter proudly stands in solidarity with the Just Majority Coalition in calling for court reform to restore the balance of the United States Supreme Court. In order to have a fair and ethical court that represents all of us, not just those of us with a whole lot of zeros in their bank account, but all of us. We need Congress to draft legislation immediately to expand this Supreme Court. We also need a binding code of ethics to reinstitute the integrity of this court. Black people have suffered for generations under the weight of racial bias and discrimination in America's court system. Partisan justices are basing their decisions on their political views and not the law. In the past decade alone, SCOTUS has sat by and watched the dismantling and contributed, I might add, to voting rights, affirmative action, and civil rights protections in education and places of commerce. We are not safe in our own country. We are not safe in our own cities. We are not safe in our own homes. And at the same time, we have seen the stripping of fundamental privacy rights such as abortion access to birth control, restricted environmental protections, and at the same time, more protections for gun rights, even though there is an overwhelming need and demand in this country for gun control. People in power are sitting silently. The justices of the Supreme Court are not above the law. We have a number of ethics issues that are hovering over the court at this time, overlaid on top of everything else I just mentioned. And I would be remiss, Congresswoman, if I did not talk about the egregious attacks happening right here in Harris County. We're talking about the takeover, hostile takeover of the Houston Independent School District. We are talking about the dismantling of the elections board that just happened in legislative session. I was telling my colleagues on the bus just now, I have the end of legislative session in Texas on my calendar because we just needed to get through. We needed to survive. We needed it to end. There were claims of issues or irregularities in Harris County elections in 2022 that stemmed around voting precincts opening late and voting precincts running out of paper. It was something like 68 precincts out of 781. And I don't know about y'all, but I think we're still having some supply chain issues for this thing called a pandemic. But that is not cause for the Republicans in Austin to pass legislation that will allow them to remove, replace, and render useless the duly elected and appointed officials who oversee elections in the largest county in this state. We all know what's driving this. Two colors, red and blue. That was what drives these decisions. The racism, the white supremacy that is rooted in that wants to silence us and take away what the late John Lewis called our most sacred right as citizens of this country, our right to vote. Because they know when we get to that ballot box, that's where our power is, y'all. We can start to put people in place who will address student loan debt, who will look at environmental justice, who will understand that all of these rights afforded to us as citizens of this country give us the opportunity to have self-governance and self-determination. But we are in a place and time where people who don't necessarily look like the people who are in power are actually the majority. And they know the only way to keep us silent and to keep their seats of power is to cheat. And so that's what brings me here today on this very warm, hot, sunny day in Texas when we think about something called climate change, because I believe in science. But that is why we are here today. And so again, we are proud to stand in solidarity with Just Majority Coalition and the 40 or so organizations that are calling for expansion of the United States Supreme Court. And next, I am proud to bring forward a sister whose work is needed now more than ever. Now more than ever, especially in this state, who had a rogue judge who just decided he could decide, reproductive freedoms for everybody in the country. But I'm not going to go there because I'm going to bring forth right now Miss Shellie Hayes-McMahon, Planned Parenthood, Texas. Sister, thank you so much for everything that you do.
That's all right, Congresswoman. Good morning. Good morning. I am privileged to stand here with my esteemed colleagues in service to the state of Texas, with my co-executive director, Drusilla Tigner, as co-executive director of Planned Parenthood Texas Votes. We fight every day for a person's right to access high-quality, judgment-free reproductive health care. Today, I stand with my colleagues as the descendant of Black women who did not have access to birth control, who did not have the right to an abortion, who barely had the right to vote when I was born. But I also stand as a passionate advocate as we bear witness in real time to the erosion of our rights within our court system. And I have to shout out Sheila Jackson Lee here because this Congresswoman, I always say about her, I'm too tall to stand in her shadow, but I can always walk in her footsteps. And I'm so proud of everything that she does. At Planned Parenthood Texas Votes, we primarily focus on advocating for reproductive health care, but we recognize that this assault on our rights extends far beyond this issue. Presidential administrations and conservative Senate majorities have manipulated our judicial system, appointing, we could almost say handpicking, judges and justices with hostile views towards abortion, LGBTQ rights, civil rights, and more, striking at the very core of our democracy. Our courts are now controlled, as you have heard from my esteemed colleagues, by politically motivated judges and justices who are waging a relentless war and assault on our freedoms. Already, and we have seen it here in Texas, where Texans are suffering to the point of death, the ending of our federal constitutional right to abortion. They have eroded our access to essential health care. They have attacked the very existence and dignity of LGBTQ people. And here in Texas, conservative groups are using, and I'm going to say handpicking again, judges to challenge the FDA's decades-old approval of mifepristone, and to bring forth a baseless lawsuit against Planned Parenthood seeking $1.8 billion over allegations that are completely false. These judges are controlling our courts, and they have shown that they are willing to disregard legal precedent and undermine our constitutional and civil rights. I will say this with my colleagues again: we must rise up, restore balance, fairness, and ethics to our courts. We have to implement reforms across all levels of our federal courts, starting with expanding the number of justices on the Supreme Court. We need fresh perspectives and voices in our highest judicial institutions because our nation is more diverse than ever. We are not living in the 1700s anymore. This is 2023, and our court has to catch up to us. It is also high time that we impose term limits for federal judges and justices to prevent the undue influence of any single administration or ideology for decades on end. In the past year, the Supreme Court has been at the center of conversations about ethics reform, as you heard Wanda say, and rightly so. We must foster transparency and integrity and hold Supreme Court justices to the highest ethical standards, as they are the highest court in the land, through stricter ethics and transparency requirements. And let us not forget our lower federal courts, which are burdened by our growing population and caseloads. We must add seats for additional judges, ensuring that justice is swift and accessible to all. We can't be just if we don't have access. Moreover, we must dismantle the avenues these interest groups have to shop for their judges and then create a system where justice is truly blind to personal agendas. Right now, the actions of these conservative judges and justices are undermining our very democracy. They are striking down policies that they personally disagree with. We need application of the law, not personal opinion. They are, effectively nullifying the voices and votes of the American people. Even when we show up in massive numbers in Harris County and in Travis County to elect pro-abortion, pro-LGBTQ, and pro-civil rights candidates, the courts can, have been, and will impede our progress. So now more than ever, we must take action to restore fairness, ethics, and justice to our court system. By implementing these necessary reforms, we can reclaim the very essence of justice and ensure that our courts truly represent the people's will, protecting our democracy for generations to come. Thank you. Congresswoman Jackson Lee will come back to the podium.
A powerful display of Americans. Thank you, Martin Luther King III. Thank you, Rashad Robinson. By the way, there are millions represented by the persons present here, and they are diverse. Wanda Mosley and Sheila Hayes-McMahon. As I open it up for questions, I want to be very clear. I'm proud to be an American. It is for the reason of that pride that should not be self-promotion, but it should be projected to the American people. Why am I proud? Because people that are of Latino descent, African descent, those who are Anglo-Caucasian, those who are Asian Pacific, those who are Southeast Asian, those who are uncalled by me, that represent the potpourri, the mosaic. We're not a melting pot. We fit the little pieces together. People rush, the Irish, the Polish, they rush to America for a number of reasons of fleeing. Some had the honor of being on Pilgrim's Pride. Some walked across the border. Some came by airplane. Some came in the bottom of the belly of a slave boat. We all have our stories. We are Americans. And I don't want the face of this, as we and the members of the United States Congress, who are not counting heads on the Supreme Court to say, that's my man, that's my woman, that's the person that I know I've got in my pocket. I know this is a liberal, I've got them. Growing up on the Earl Warren Court, for some of us, I didn't know what they were. I knew they were the United States Supreme Court. When Justice Thurgood Marshall was on the court, I didn't know what they were. I knew they were saving me under the Constitution of the United States of America. Today, it saddens my heart. And let me be very clear, on this day of International Anti-Gun Violence Day, I got Dobbs and Dobbs, B and D, Dodd being the elementary school in Uvalde. And the Dobbs is the decision that I am speechless about. So I just want to say these points. I sat in the confirmation hearings of Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown, of Mr. Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. I heard the questions on precedent, pointedly asked at one time by the now present Vice President of the United States, do you adhere to the precedent of Roe v. Wade? Do you adhere? Do you understand the precedent of Roe v. Wade? Madam, and I heard my ears, every single person saying it is precedent. I didn't say that it was precedent to do something dangerous to the American people, to attack the January 6th, that they were that we were asking them to support revolution and rampage. We just said the basic law. Is it precedent, Martin, on the 14th Amendment, equal protection? Is it precedent on the 15th Amendment, the right to vote, the 1965 Voting Rights Act? But all of this has been turned upside down. The Shelby case left me empty, speechless, desperate. Not for me that I might be able to get a vote in, but for all those new voters, those language voters, those nervous voters, those voters in country places in America, North and South. And the Shelby case took away our privilege to say that a disabled person was prevented from voting because you didn't come out to the curb to help them vote. I just want this to be not about those people. I want this to be about championing America and Americans' rights. And it hurts me that the process of confirmation that I had come to respect had then been unraveled in front of my eyes, and I didn't know that people could under oath say things that were in that I couldn't imagine. We're getting ready to go to the court on DEI, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Let me be very clear. White people are included in that. Their stories are included in that. White Houstonians, all Houstonians. We're getting ready to go to the court on affirmative action. Oh, my goodness. Does anybody know what affirmative means? It just means affirming. It's not, it means we want this to happen. And of course, we will go to the court on stopping gun violence. So I just conclude by saying I thank all of these patriots, courageous persons. I happen to be an original co-sponsor of H.R. 3432, which is a court expansion bill led by my good friend Hank Johnson out of Georgia. And tons of members have supported it because we too want to do what is right. And so to these courageous persons, I am grateful, and we are willing at this point to take the questions that you may have on this very humbling day to try to be able to stand up for America. Any questions? Yeah.
There's a Supreme Court case flying under the radar a bit that I'm sure you know about, Moore in North Carolina, allowing state legislatures to have final say over votes.
And redistricting.
Is that talked about among your colleagues
That's why the court is so important and powerful. I think the court has more jurisdiction and judgment over our lives. So let me add that, yes, let me add that the district I stand in is because Martin's father, I'm in a voting rights district. I would never have been in Congress from the early years had it not been created right after 1965 Voting Rights Act. In this state, we ran at large. The Honorable Barbara Jordan never won a seat. She ran at large, Martin. When she ran at large, she would get accolades, but would lose every time. After the 1965 Voting Rights Act, lines became drawn, and she went to the state Senate as the first African American since Reconstruction, and maybe not even in Reconstruction. So we live by the Supreme Court on voting rights. The legislature there would have the right to overturn, which is a copycat of the governor having the right to overturn in Harris County. I want everybody to know that we have a lawsuit, so we're making our way up ultimately to the Supreme Court. The same thing in North Carolina, to make your way, because legislators made decisions. We can't really account that they made it for everybody, because it was a certain inclination of the legislature that were allegedly in the majority, but they drew the district, so who knows who's left out and disagrees with that, but they can overturn elections. Who knows who's left out in Harris County who disagrees with you taking over the election. And forgive me, my colleagues that are here, since I've lived it, I was in the field in 2022 at a voting place. I was there. I was on the ballot. I was handing out literature. Yes, they did stop. Friends, there was no fraud. There was nobody intending to be malicious. Yes, you made an important point. The supply chain. We didn't have enough paper. We're on the back end of the pandemic. The paper came out quickly, meaning it had to come from downtown. Good, people were voting, and we stopped it for a moment. It wasn't we were late. We stopped it to get the paper. That's not fraud. That is logistics and overturning an election because logistics went wrong. Thank you. Went wrong. I don't understand the basis. In the Congress, which I tout for when it does things right, we have eons of hearings and paper going around to say that we are doing this because of that. I may disagree what we're doing, but I don't know what happened with the clarion call about overturning elections. We heard it was going, but we couldn't believe it was going, and then all of a sudden it was law against many good people who said it could not. So to answer your question, sorry, but a little abbreviated, I'm aware of the case. I'm aware of the process granted to the North Carolina legislature, and aware that the case is making its way. That is the question and the reason why we're standing here today, because whatever the decision of the court is, I want to be vested in the rightness and righteousness of that decision. And I have been able to be vested in the rightness and righteousness in years past. I am frightened of what to expect in these coming years. Anyone else want to comment on that one? Okay. Any other questions?
Congresswoman, we've heard a lot of talk of expanding the courts in general terms, but specifically, what number are we talking about? To 11, to 13, to 15? And then, with that in respect, the federal appeals court process would have to change as well. Are we talking about overhauling and expanding the appeals courts as well?
Well, I'm going to ask some others to come join me. I will just say that the bill that I am holding up is H.R. 3422. It's 12. There have been discussions about 13. There have been discussions about 15. We think at this point it's 9. We'd be adding 3 justices. It'll be a legislative determination both in the House and the Senate. And then the only thing I would say is we realize that the overall federal court system, I'm on the Judiciary Committee, must be fairly assessed. We don't expect to go in like persons who are doing massive surgery. We expect to go in and be thoughtful to know how the federal court system can best stand up, not for me, not I'm going in to carve out Sheila's rights. I'm going in to carve out what is best for America and what is best for a just system to render to the most vulnerable who use the court. Is there anyone else want to come and
I think you covered it.
and so yes, we will have to look at both the district court and the Court of Appeals. You're absolutely right. I'm in the 11th. There's the 11th and 5th Circuit that are challenging, very challenging. And what we have found is that on that court, the tentacles of divide are being confronted. A litigant should not go into these courts and have anything to base the decision on other than the presentation that they make and the law that exists. They should have no fear of anyone having woken up that morning and has an inclination to be associated with persons who disrupt this nation, persons who are sick and tired of these people being in this country. You can't have that on the court. The court has to be a pure representation, since it is a federal court, of federal law, precedent, and the Constitution. That Constitution is very clear. It doesn't have any penetration of partyism in it. It tells you to go there. Is it a First Amendment violation? Then I rule against you. Is it a Second Amendment violation framed by case law? And the Second Amendment is framed to say there can be regulations. That's the amendment, the right to bear arms. And of course, everybody knows it says in there, and to stand up a militia. That's when it was first written. But the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable, you can't have unreasonable search and seizure. The Fifth Amendment, due process. Sixth Amendment, right to trial by jury. And going on to one that I love, 14th and 15th Amendment. And of course, the one that America came around in the 1800s, and that is the abolition of slavery. So there are many others. The right to a woman's right to vote. They waited for so long. So the court doesn't have to do much but to be stately, look at the body of law, be an engine of correctiveness, not an engine of undermining precedent that has served the American people dutifully, respectfully, and holistically. It frightens me. I'm supporting my local officials moving up to sue about the rights of local people being taken away on the overturning of elections. I think that's the word we should say. There's authority to overturn elections. But I am hesitant as it makes its way up and ultimately to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. So it is 12 in this legislation. Other numbers have been discussed. And that is let me just say that is a modest, respectful offering after how many years that this nation first organized, which, by the way, there's no constitutional number in the Constitution, and the court has been a number of numbers during the history of the United States. This is not sacred right now. We've been different numbers. as the Supreme Court. It has been small and it has grown. Thank you. Guys,